Iran demanded a public apology from Donald Trump for making direct threats of violence against members of the Iranian delegation. Yesterday's negotiations between the US and Iran ended in a major scandal when the President of the United States, Donald Trump, personally called members of the Iranian delegation and threatened them that they would not return home if they did not make concessions to him. It got to the point where Donald Trump stated that he would destroy Iran at any cost if the Iranians did not unblock the Hormuz Strait and hand it over personally to the American president. Trump himself later boasted on Fox News that yes, he did indeed make that statement personally to the Iranian negotiators. That, and I quote, "close the strait and you won't have a country. You won't even be able to return to your damn country after that." The Iranians immediately stated that they would not tolerate this and demanded a public apology. But Trump didn't stop there and went on to threaten the Iranian president, saying that he should watch his words. In response, the Iranians began to say that Trump's threats haven't worked for a long time and that he shouldn't embarrass himself with such threats. Oh, and in the meantime, before they could talk, the negotiators reached a deadlock in their negotiations. Both sides still managed to state that they were able to reach an agreement on the issue of lifting sanctions on Iranian oil. Also, by the way, there has been progress on the issue of unfreezing Iranian assets. My name is Pechy. Let's now, while it's still fresh, analyze together the first results of the initial direct negotiations between the American and Iranian delegations, which took place just recently in Switzerland. And of course, we'll also discuss the rather strange behavior of the American president, while his vice president, was still trying to somehow establish a dialogue with the Iranians within the framework of that very 60-day memorandum of understanding. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write any comment you want under this episode. And also subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechy News, the link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, the first direct talks between the United States of America and Iran were almost disrupted before they even began. And while US Vice President J.D. Vance, along with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, were trying to negotiate, US President Trump couldn't hold back, lost his temper, and started calling the Iranian delegates with threats. Well, I can imagine how these negotiations were going, and at that moment Trump starts throwing threats at the Iranians. And Trump stated that the US could take control of the Hormuz Strait if they couldn't reach an agreement with Iran, and he threatened the Iranian delegation negotiating in Switzerland. Moreover, Trump started to go overboard. While Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner were negotiating, Trump called Fox News and said live on air, quote, "We might take control of the Hormuz Strait if necessary. If they don't make a deal, we will charge a fee for passage." And a little later, the same Trump added that the US could become the guardian angel of the Hormuz Strait, as he put it, and start not only charging a fee for ships passing through the Hormuz Strait, but also, quote, taking 20% of the transported oil for itself. This is Trump's kind of response to Iran's plans to charge a fee for ships passing through the Hormuz Strait. At the same time, on Saturday, the Iranian military command announced the closure of the strait due to renewed fighting in Lebanon between Hezbollah and Israel, which the Iranians called the first condition for negotiations. They said the war in Lebanon must end before negotiations can begin. As a result, Trump stated that he personally told the Iranian representatives, quote, "Close the strait and you won't have a country. You won't even be able to return to your damn country." But apparently that wasn't enough. And then Trump lashed out at the Iranians again about Hezbollah militants in Lebanon who are actually violating the ceasefire with Israel and thus disrupting the memorandum between the US and Iran. Next, another quote from Trump. "Iran must immediately stop its highly paid proxies in Lebanon from causing trouble. If they don't do this, we will strike Iran very hard again." Just like last week, only even harder. In addition, Trump called on the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, to watch his words after he said that Iran supposedly does not intend to give up uranium enrichment at all. And following all this, the Iranian delegation protested to the United States of America and left the meeting place in Switzerland. The Iranians stated that they believe the behavior of the American president violates point 1 of the Memorandum of Understanding between the US and Iran, according to which both sides are obliged to refrain from making threats against each other. That was indeed stated there, but Trump started making threats again. As a result, the Iranian delegation left the negotiations, actually took a break, held consultations, and, coming out to the press, demanded that the American negotiators have the US President Donald Trump apologize to them for the threats. Well, it's unknown whether Donald Trump apologized, but the negotiations still continued because they are very important for Iran right now, and that should be acknowledged. On the other hand, the pause in the negotiations gave the Iranians another chance to rub Donald Trump's face in the dirt, and I'll explain why. The chief negotiator from Iran, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, after the meeting, after this pause in the negotiations, came out and said, quote, "Do they really never think that if their threats actually worked, they wouldn't have reached such desperation? We absolutely do not take the Americans' threats seriously. They'd better choose their words carefully. Our armed forces are ready to respond to them in another way. No matter how much they talk, it is we who will take action." It's interesting that while Trump was making these threats, he was calling Fox News, giving a live interview there, and talking about how he would capture the Strait of Hormuz. At that very time, his Vice President J.D. Vance and his envoys Witkoff and Kushner, while in Bergenstock, Switzerland, were stating that the U.S. had nevertheless taken on the obligation to achieve a complete regional ceasefire. And J.D. Vance also insisted that Trump had asked him to tell the Iranians that the U.S. is ready to fundamentally transform its relationship with Iran and even become almost the best friends in the region. Against this backdrop, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, a well-known hardliner on Iran and a strong supporter of Trump himself, repeated President Donald Trump's threat to take control of the Strait of Hormuz if diplomatic efforts with the Iranians fail. But Lindsey Graham, in fact, embellished Donald Trump's words even more, and they sounded like this. Here is the quote.
"Let's try a diplomatic solution. I think it's going to fail. What happens next? I spent 4.5 hours with President Trump Friday. Here's what I think will happen next. If this deal fails, President Trump is going to take the Strait of Hormuz over by force. The United States will control the Strait of Hormuz. We'll charge a fee for all those who go through to pay for the operation, and we're going to expand the Abraham Accords in calendar year 2026. We're going to get Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords, and that's the biggest change in 5,000 years in the Middle East. And if Iran contests control of the Strait of Hormuz by the United States, we'll obliterate them." So to all the people listening, if this diplomatic effort fails, President Trump is going to take the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to run it. We're going to try to get Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords to end the Arab-Israeli conflict in 2026. And if Iran continues to attack Israel and Lebanon, the new policy will be, we'll hit Iran. So to the Iranians, if you're listening, when you use Hezbollah to attack Israel, I think the new policy will be, we will attack Iran.
But despite all these public mutual threats to each other, the negotiations still took place. More precisely, the first stage, the first round of negotiations still took place. It is known that one of the issues discussed at the negotiations was the mechanisms for preventing conflicts in Lebanon and ensuring compliance with the ceasefire amid clashes between Hezbollah and Israeli forces in the south of the country. And as I mentioned in the previous episode on this YouTube channel, representatives of Israel and Lebanon and even Hezbollah were not invited to these negotiations. And in fact, the first round of negotiations between the US and Iran was focused on the war in Lebanon, but that war was being decided entirely without the actual parties to it. In addition, they managed to discuss elements of a future nuclear deal, but as sources say, only briefly, while other issues are still being discussed. They touched on the issue of control over the Hormuz Strait, and of course the issue of sanctions and frozen Iranian assets was also raised. And so, on one hand, Iranian media have already stated that the parties have completed drafting a project agreement on the temporary lifting of US sanctions against Iran regarding Iranian oil and petroleum products. Hossein Garbanzadeh, an economics expert from the Iranian delegation, stated that the issue of lifting sanctions will soon be put into effect. Well, in short, they've agreed on the sanctions. Now all that's left is to launch the mechanism and resume licensing for the transportation of Iranian oil. He confirmed that the parties also discussed the unfreezing of Iranian assets. Well, what next? It's funny. Garbanzadeh added that the other provisions of the Memorandum of Understanding between the US and Iran will not move to the implementation stage until the issue of ending the war in Lebanon is resolved and until Israel withdraws its troops from Lebanon, which Israel does not intend to do. But when it comes to lifting sanctions and unfreezing Iranian assets, in principle, they can tolerate the war in Lebanon and turn a blind eye to it. And these points, he says, we can implement. Well, even if Hezbollah and Israel exchange strikes, but everything else is absolutely out of the question. And so far, the Americans are agreeing to this. On the other hand, the United States Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, the parties, the minister began to downplay the concessions and urged everyone not to overestimate, as he put it, not to overestimate the scale of the concessions, noting that Iran had been evading sanctions for years anyway, so their removal actually means nothing. Here is a quote from Chris Wright. "Oh, the Iranians have been selling oil for most of the last 47 years. All they're getting now is just the opportunity to sell their oil again. Just, making billions of dollars from selling oil. That's all. Such a trivial thing." Sorry, I'll continue the quote. "But we have proven to them over these 2 months that we can completely stop the sale of their oil down to the last drop, and that's an important source of leverage. Now the situation will return to its previous state, but they won't get any of their other assets back. Their own frozen assets will not be unfrozen until meaningful and verifiable progress is made in the nuclear negotiations. The Iranians no longer have the leverage in negotiations that they always used to have." Wright decided not to specify exactly what kind of leverage. The high-level political talks between the US and Iran, mediated by Qatar and Pakistan, are expected to conclude today. J.D. Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner will fly back to the United States of America. And the technical teams will most likely stay in Switzerland to continue the negotiations. Well, unless, of course, Donald Trump makes another strange statement again. I'll leave it at that. Friends, share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would be grateful. All the links and details on how to do this are in the description of this video. I also want to tell you that I have created a private community called Pechy Insight especially for you, where together in a small circle we discuss certain topics that are not covered here on YouTube. There is no self-censorship there. I consult with you about which topics we can bring up on this YouTube channel, and there I also answer your personal questions. So, the link to the private community is in the description of this video. Be sure to check it out and subscribe. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.